Well, good morning. I'm Dave Domingue with Georgia School of Preaching and Biblical Studies, and this is the first class of the P102 Elementary Hebrew and Greek for Ministry. This is the third time I've done this. Last night I taught the class and forgot to press record for the first half of the class. The second half I've already emailed out to everyone. Well, then this morning I said, well, let me get this recorded, the second half, and got everything set up. And sure enough, it recorded, but I forgot to share my screen. So all it is me talking, and you can see me, but not the slides. And so it's like, I really am not the smartest person in the room. And I'm the only one in the room. So that says a lot, I think. So let me share screen and let's get started. All right, so let's get started. So this is a new course to Georgia School of Preaching, and we are, it's required for the preaching certificate. Let's see, am I changing slides here? Let's get over here and make sure it's changing slides. Next. I'm going to do it that way. Okay, there we go. Okay, it is a required for the preaching certificate. It is added. There's a committee, an advisory committee with the Georgia School of Preaching and Biblical Studies that agreed to add this course because there's a gap between learning any biblical language and applying the biblical language. While there are many rewards associated with learning a biblical language, and the rewards are great, it's a lot of work to learn the language, and one can easily focus on the language, that is the grammar, the vocabulary, and the syntax, and memorization, and such, and paradigms, and then lose focus of the intended spiritual application. There's an old Scottish proverb, Greek, Hebrew, and Latin all have their proper place, but it's not at the head of the cross where Pilate put them, but at the foot of the cross in humble service to Christ. The primary purpose of any biblical language, of learning it, is to serve the body of Christ, his church. The biblical language exists as God's tool to teach, to reprove, to correct, to train in righteousness, so that the man of God may be adequate, equipped for every good work, 2 Timothy 3:16 and 17. A disciple of Christ combines biblical mentality with a servant's heart as an example for others. It's not how much Bible I know, but how much others see the Bible in me. Biblical language are just one tool in a servant's tool belt. This course is intended to help us to use the knowledge, the tool belt that we have or will have, to apply our study of God's word into our lives and live in the lives around us, that they might gain a better understanding of God's will for them. So our approach to this, and especially, I know many worry about the language, the Greek and the Hebrew especially. We're not expected for you to become scholarly grammarians. It's not about learning Hebrew or Greek, but becoming familiar with the Hebrew and Greek and the grammar and its use. We're going to emphasize recognition and understand how grammar is used. Each class will be segmented into three parts: exegetical principles, elementary grammar, and exegetical practices. So I'm going to go over that in a little more depth in a moment. But let's look at the syllabus very quickly. Let's see. Can I do this? There we go. That works. It's a 3 credit hour semester hour course. We're going to go to November 14 classes through November 12th. We meet on Thursday nights from 6 to 8:30. It's a basic course in the use of biblical Hebrew and Greek and biblical languages as study tools in Christian ministry. Classes designed to introduce the student to the biblical language, to provide a practical working knowledge and elementary skills in order to enhance their ministry and service. It's not about the language in of itself, but how it's applied to enhance your ministry and your service. The objectives: upon completion of this course, you should have an elementary knowledge of biblical Hebrew and Greek and morphology and grammar. Not so much vocabulary, although we'll look at vocabulary with reference to word studies that we're doing, and in that sense, along with various exegetical tools to study God's words. A student, we should be able to use the latest Hebrew and Greek lexicons. We're going to look at a few of those to investigate the meaning of significant words and to exegete selected biblical passages. We talked about exegete last night in the second half, which is recorded and has been emailed to you. To understand basic grammar and syntax of biblical Hebrew and Greek, enough to communicate with the tools, interface with them, to engage in more advanced exegetical tools and commentaries with greater confidence. Communicate the results of your study, your exegetical research, to others. Our approach is to help students achieve these objectives is going to be, I want to take this into 3 segments. I've had this class, I took this type of class once at another place, and it was very haphazard, and I struggled with it. And so I wanted to find a structured way to do this. And it's the first time it's been taught within the school here. And so I divided this into 3 segments each night. The first part will be exegetical principles. And that class will look at, that portion will look at a student at foundational word study practices and tools. We'll address exegetical tools and practices. We're going to look at morphology, that's how words are formed. We're going to look at semantics, that is word meaning and the range of meanings. We'll look at syntax, that is grammatical relationships between words, because it's not just the word that's the emphasis, it's the relationship it has in its context, and both the immediate context and the broader context. And the second part of each class will be a grammar, where we'll introduce and examine very basic elements of Hebrew and Greek. Now, don't get scared to death in the Hebrew and Greek. I know when I took Hebrew, I was scared to death to start with it. Greek, not as much, still a little bit concerned, a little bit trepidation with it, but at least the Greek symbols, the alphabet, has some familiarity to at least some of them, most of them anyway, but Hebrew not so well. But it turns out that Hebrew, because we're not used to or accustomed to the symbology that's used, the alphabet, as well as reading from right to left, it has a steeper learning curve. But once you get up that learning curve, Hebrew is really much easier to grasp and apply. So the goal here is to gain familiarity with it in order to use the tools, not to become a grammarian or a scholarly Greek or Hebrew scholar. This third part is probably the most exciting part. I had a good time last night with this, and I hope you did as well. That's practical exegesis, the practicum. Well, and the intent is to be a participatory demonstration of biblical word study and passages exegesis. Last night, there wasn't any participatory, not much anyway, and I want to have that evolve to be more participatory in discussion. But I was a little pressed for time because of how much time the introduction took. But that's to be expected, and we'll improve upon it in many areas as well. So in terms of your grades, for those taken for credit, class participation does matter. We want you to be involved, and it's the reason we've done a lot of effort in order to, and a lot of help from people. I want to thank Larry Lester and Caleb Smith and Chris Tidwell and Emory Communications for helping us set up this interactive communication approach. Didn't want to just stream. I wanted to have something that's interactive that you can be involved in online. So participation matters. We put this much effort into it. We expect you to participate. Greek, or the other half of this, or part of this, a Greek exegetical expository word study, 45% of the final course grade, and same with the Hebrew exegetical expository word study, 45% of your final course grade. I'll go over those in a little bit here. But I want to introduce at least some lexicons. Let me turn this off so it stops beating. Let's see, I didn't do it, did it? We'll just see. I'm going to very quickly try to go over these. I think I'm spending way too much time. Listen, BDAG, let me get my arrow over here. Let me switch this to this is what I like about this. Okay. BDAG is probably the best standard for scholarly lexicon. Now, lexicon is a glorified dictionary. It looks beyond just the definition and the glosses of words. It gives you additional information. BDAG looks beyond that, and I'm going to touch on these very quickly. Strong's is probably one of the most popular ones. BDAG has about 8,095 Greek words. It does not have Hebrew. The corresponding Hebrew, scholarly Hebrew, is BDB, Brown, Driver, and Briggs, Hebrew and English lexicon. Strong's has both Greek and Hebrew. It has about 14,000 words of both. Collectively, it includes materials from Vines and Thayers and such. It's very easy to use, very well known. Strong's numbers are used in other reference materials to correlate back to it. I'm going to touch on some of this in a minute. And then there's Lowe's Anita. Lowe's Anita is a Greek-English lexicon of New Testament based on semantic domains. A semantic domain is you look at semantic as a meaning. Say I want to understand all the words related to love, or all the words related to home or whatever it might be, and it will then break it down in that category. The only difficulty is you have to kind of know what you're looking for, but if you do, it gives you a much greater, broader perspective of words associated with that semantic domain. The Exegetical Dictionary of the New Testament is a great new dictionary, but it also has a theological component to it. And I'm going to talk more about the issues with theological dictionaries. We have the Complete Word Study Dictionary of the New Testament and of the Old Testament. Great word study books. They're limited on what they provide, but they're a good start. Already mentioned BDB. Also the Concise Hebrew and Aramaic Lexicon of the Old Testament. This is based on more updated scholarship than BDB is. It uses more contemporary English words and language in its glosses and its translation of Hebrew words. And it lists Hebrew words alphabetically, makes it easier to find, where here BDB uses the roots. But BDB also codes with Strong's Concordance, so it has a direct correlation back here. Although I think the how may as well, I don't remember. The Theological Workbook of the Old Testament. This is a theological word book, not workbook. And it has helpful expansions to understand the historical context and usage over time. And it is a theological lexicon, like the Theological Dictionary of the New Testament, like the Theological Dictionary of the Old Testament. They delve into theological questions and controversies. That's good and bad. And so we want to touch on, we'll see some of that later. We already mentioned the two word study books. There are some examples that I want to kind of provide. Let's see, there we go. Here's a picture of BDAG, the Greek English Lexicon New Testament, and other early, and this is the important part, other early Christian literatures, not just the New Testament. They look at other classical Greek as well as contemporary to the New Testament author Greek and even some beyond. And so here's an example of biblios, and it's a feminine word, and they give you some references. Here's the gloss. It's a book, later especially a sacred or venerable book, and they give you some references to Plato and some other classical references that shows where they gain their understanding of it, etc. And here's the first definitions: is a specific composition or class of composition. Its gloss is a book. They italicize the gloss. A book of teaching in the Didaske, and a book of Moses in 1 Ezra 5 verse 48, as well as in Mark 12 verse 26. So here's our biblical reference and some other non-biblical, non-canonical references here as well. Great for scholarly understanding to how that word is used generally and how it's used specifically in our biblical applications. Also the second definition, a book of accounts. In other words, a record book, especially a biblios tes zoes, that is a book of life. There is a book of life, Philippians 4 and verse 3, Revelation 3 and verse 5, here's Revelation 13 verse 8. If it has a reference here without the book, it goes back to the previous reference, Revelation 3 verse 5, Revelation 13 verse 8, and Revelation 20 and verse 15. And so that gives you some other references, articles that are written that if you want additional research that you could pull up. So very scholarly level. The difficulty with it is it can be very dense. It may be difficult to follow and understand sometimes, especially someone who has no biblical language. It's not intended for someone who has no biblical language. And even those who have very little, it can be very hard, but you can see you can very slowly go through and find what you need to know and find other references if you want to go further. The point of this class is to be able to interface with BDB and the New Testament Greek, as well as other reference materials. Strong's Concordance, Strong's Dictionary of the New Testament. Here's the same word, biblios, Strong's number 976. Biblios, they give you the pronunciation, biblos. I say biblios, it's biblos. I keep doing that. Proposed the inner bark of the papyrus plant, so it gives you a little background. And they gloss, or it's a sheet or scroll of writing, and they gloss it as a book. So you see there's less depth available, it's a little easier to use. The risk of easier to use is it's also easier to abuse. You don't have as much depth to understand all aspects of its usage. This is supposed to be a summary of Lo and Nida, but I never changed the picture, so this is not accurate. I'll have to fix that later. The exegetical dictionary of the New Testament, here's Biblios again. A scroll or book is the gloss that they give, and they give you a little background. They give some literature. This is some of the reference material that they have pulled from in order to, that they're referencing sort of their bibliography for Biblion. Biblios appears 10 times in the New Testament, so it gives us some reference material for that. Thus appears less frequently than most synonyms for the noun. The noun synonym is biblion, as well as with biblion twice. So biblios is used for sacred writings of the Old Testament, Mark 12, verse 26. So it gives you more background and usage of it in the Pentateuch and the Torah scroll, which same thing. Also, you see there's Josephus Antiquities and Second Maccabees references, and Daniel and First Maccabees references. So the Book of Life is called Biblios Oes, and Philippians 4 verse 3, or is Revelation 3 verse 5, 20 verse 15, and then we already saw in BDAG. Acts 19 verse 19, the plural refers to the Ephesian books of magic, and they give some references that are secular, worth about 50,000 drachmas, which were burned openly, and so forth. So there's a little more background and depth, and the exegetical dictionary of the New Testament gives a little more historic and theological perspective, in some cases more than others. BDB, we've touched on. BDB is very dense and sometimes hard to read. The Hebrew equivalent for biblios, for the Greek word biblios, is sefer. There it is right there. And they reference the theological words of the Old Testament, which and Strong's numbers right here, theological words of the Old Testament, its number. There's another lexicon reference. It's a noun, it's masculine, and its meaning is sort of emissive, a document, a writing, or book, probably an ancient load word from the Assyrian, sepru, and meaning missive or message, and they give references for that and so forth. But you have to kind of walk through it to find where the definitions are, and there's number one right there. Number one, missive, A, letter of instruction, a written order, commission, or request, usually from a king. And there's some references, 2 Samuel 11, 14 and 15, 1, verse 15, 1 Kings 21, verse 8, and so forth. And then you have to kind of continue to scroll through, and they give references how it's used in these passages as a written decree for publication, and so forth. And here's the Hebrew correlate to these passages, or this passage is here, and so forth. And you continue to scroll through, and we'll find the second definition right here as a legal document. And so there's Sefer Kiretut. My Hebrew is not as good as my Greek, and my Greek is not great. So a certificate of divorce, Deuteronomy 24, verse 1 and 3, and figuratively in Jeremiah 3 and verse 8, Isaiah 50 and verse 1. And so they give you as a deed of purchase, and so forth, indictment, and so forth. And here's number 3, a book or scroll in which something is written to preserve it for the future, such as Exodus 17 verse 14, and so forth. And number 4 is way down here. There's Sefer, a book of learning, especially writings, and a lot of references for it. So the BDB is one of the best scholarly documents or lexicons, but it's difficult to read and to follow. One can sort of search through and find what you need, but it is can be a little daunting when you see all this Hebrew that you're not familiar with. And I know even at this class, it's still going to feel daunting, but you don't need to be an expert to basically pronounce the words and then follow what he's trying to say here with regard to that specific word. What's confusing is it's just like one long paragraph rather than breaking in some structural way that we could understand. Probably easier to read, a concise Hebrew and Aramaic lexicon of the Old Testament. This is updated with more current documents or information that's known. Here's Safer, and number 1 is an inscription, and they give references for it. Number 2, a writing, a document or scroll. Sub A, phrases that specify writing, and Kitab al-Sefer, record in writings of Deuteronomy 17, verse 18, and often Kitab Sefer, L in God, 2 Samuel 11, verse 14, and so forth. You see, it's not as dense, a little easier to read. Still might be a little intimidating. They use the Hebrew, but they use the Hebrew in transliteration, and so it's not like you're reading the Hebrew, but you're reading in English letters, kind of thing. So here is Strong's for the Hebrew component of that. Here's the Hebrew verb Sefer, and they give you a pronunciation, Sefer. Or the feminine word is Sifra, a little different pronunciation, Sifra, Sifra, from Strong's 5608, proposed writing, the art of a document, art or a document by implication, a book, a bill, a book or evidence, such as learned, a letter, register, or scroll. So not as depth, but an easier structure to see. Again, with Strong's, it's a good start to look, but it doesn't give you a lot of depth to it, but it gives you a basic input. Here's the Theological Word Book of the Old Testament. We saw that referenced up here with here, I think it was here. I don't remember where it was now. Yeah. I don't remember. It doesn't matter. I'm spending too much time with that. What's great about any theological dictionary or lexicon is it gives you a lot more background and a lot more input and understanding of the word, whether it be the Greek or the Hebrew or say the general Greek or the Jewish literature. And so this says it's a writing or book, and also as a sofer, a related word meaning scribe. And so you see the relationship between a sofer who produces sefer. And both words are usually considered to be East Semitic loan words. Sefer from Akkadian. Akkadian is very similar to Hebrew. A shipur, writing, message itself, from shaparu, to send or to write. And so there's more background here. Semitic verb, and here's the root, Semitic pay and row, row occurs with many Semitic developments in Southwest Semitic. It means to set out on a journey. So there's a lot more background here. Position and work of the sofer, that's the scribe, were of great significance in ancient Near East. The oldest scribal traditions go back to ancient poles of culture at either end of the Fertile Crescent, Mesopotamia and Egypt and Babylon. The scribal art began very early, and on and on and on. Pre-exile Israel, the position and work of the scribes is not clearly delineated. It is known that the scribal art was in existence, and so a lot more background relative to the word and its usage, and in some cases, more theological input, not so much with Sefer, but we'll look at some later. Here is the complete word study dictionary of the New Testament and the complete word study dictionary of the Old Testament. That's limited on the words they have. They did not have the Sefer for the book in Hebrew, and nor do they have Biblos, excuse me, I keep putting the E in there, Biblos, that's a bad habit. But here's an example of harmatolos and a transliteration to look at it in the genitive form, harmatolo, masculine, feminine, neuter, harmatolon, adjective. And so they give you the grammatical breakdown of it, and it means to deviate, to miss the mark, to sin, erring from the way, or a mark. In the New Testament, metaphorically used as an adjective or substantive, and it breaks down other definitions and reference and usage. The Jews called the Gentile sinners or despisers of God and considered them heathens or pagan. So here's a basic input for a word study with regard to harmatolos. And over here we have the word Moseda. Moseda is a feminine singular noun meaning foundation. It always occurs in the plural. And so it often refers to the foundation of the world and gives you a reference to 2 Samuel 22:16, Psalms 18, verse 15, or to the base of a man-made construction such as a building or wall. Jeremiah 51:26 shows that example. So a little simpler to use, a little more background to it, not as deep as some of the other theological dictionaries, but more emphasizing a word study approach. Here's some recommended references for grammars. Mouse's A Basic of Biblical Greek. It's one I've used many times, and I like it because it's foundational and building block approach. It's quite useful and easy to use. This is the 4th edition, which I don't yet have. I taught from the 3rd edition. This is brand new, the beginning with New Testament Greek, introductory study of grammar and syntax of the New Testament, put out by Rob Plummer and Ben Merkel. I did receive this recently, and it's a good grammar book. I may look at using it the next time I teach Greek. If you want to go beyond that in terms of the basic grammar, and we are going to at least touch on beyond the basic grammar in terms of how the words are used in context. This teaches you the basic of how the word is, what it means. This gives you more information how it's used in various contexts. By Dr. Daniel Wallace, Greek Grammar Beyond the Basics. It's called Beyond the Basics because there's a companion book, The Basics of New Testament Syntax, which is much smaller. It's the exact same book, except that this one is Beyond the Basics by they add many more examples, and that's the only difference. An exegetical syntax of the New Testament, and this has more examples, but there is one, there's a smaller book that is the Basics of New Testament Syntax that is the exact same thing. The Hebrew version of the Greek Mounts grammar is the Basic of Biblical Hebrew Grammar by Gary Practical and by Miles Van Pelt. This I've used and really like. There's a couple other Hebrew grammars. One that I've also used that I think is a little more complex. This breaks it down into more foundational building block approach, and I like that. Some other recommended references. If you're not strong in grammar, English grammar, these small books here, very small books, English Grammar to Ace the New Testament Greek, English Grammar to Ace the Biblical Hebrew, are great references in order to grasp the grammatical English grammar and apply it to Greek or to Hebrew. If you don't recognize or remember how a noun is used, or what an adverb is, or an adjective, or what's adverbial, what's adjectival, how prepositions work. These provide great introductory points in English, but also correlate them in a really neat way to the Greek and the Hebrew. Well, a book I really recommend, Linguistics for New Testaments for Students of New Testament Greek, A Survey of Basic Concepts and Application by David Adam Black. This gets into how words are formed, and I'm gonna draw a lot from here, and it's a very useful book. It's the New Testament Greek Morpheme Lexicon. This gives you let's see, I was pulling it up earlier. This is basically looks at the formation of words. So the first part of it looks at alphabetical breakdown, and it gives you how the different say the root versus the prefix and suffix. It sort of gives you that picture. It also has a section that deals with just the prefixes of words, a section that deals with the roots of words, and a section that deals with the suffix of words. And so it gives you a gloss of words and based on their suffix, or a gloss of words based on the prefix, and a very useful tool in terms of learning how words are used. Using New Testament Greek in Ministry for Practical Guide for Students and Pastors by David Allen Black, I have, and I'm pulling from. It's a very useful book. It covers areas that we're going to pull from, such as, and we're touching on tonight, off the shelf and into yourself, selecting the right tools for Greek exegesis. Well, we're going to pull from this as well as other sources to look at what tools are available, and we're touching on that tonight. Well, actually this morning, it was tonight. I can't remember if I told you I didn't record last night. So not only did I not record last night, so this morning I said, well, let me get up and get it recorded at the first half of the lesson. So I did that this morning. I recorded it, but I didn't have the share screen for the slide. And so I'm doing it for the 3rd time. I think I did tell you that. It also talks about how developing your exegetical skills and going from theory to practice. And we're going to pull a lot from that book. as others. Bible Word Studies How-To Guide. This is sort of an extract from a magazine, various extracts from a magazine called Biblical Studies, and I think that's what it's called. And there are various word studies that are in that magazine. And it's not so much how-to, there's not a lot of how-to in it, but it does provide some word studies that and basically using that as a potential guide. We're going to look at multiple approaches to word studies as we go through the various weeks here, and I'm going to be pulling some from here. Biblical words and their meaning, an introduction to lexical semantics. Semantics means meaning, and so by Moises Silva. An excellent book that gets deep into how words are formed and how the meaning comes about. Here's a book I really recommend by D.A. Carson's Exegetical Fallacies. We're going to pull from here as well as other sources every week to talk about fallacies, how words are abused and improperly improper exegetical usage. And so there's some references. There are a whole lot more. And you may know some, and maybe you can point us to some. Some online references. You don't have to have a lot of money to have access to concordances, dictionaries, or lexicons. Here's one that's online. It's free, BibleStudyTools.com. BibleStudyTools.com. Concordance, dictionaries, and lexicons. And they have various concordances. You see, there's Strong's, and there's Torrey's, and Treasure of Scripture Knowledge, and Nave's Topical Bible, various dictionaries, a quick reference, Baker's, Easton's, Hitchcock, King James Dictionary, Smith's Bible Dictionary, some others. This is just a picture. Lexicons, a New Testament Greek lexicon, the Old Testament Greek lexicon. These are free. You don't have to be have a massive library in your house, whether it be online or electronic or in paper. You can access these online for free. You can also get Logos or Logos as well as Accordance for free. And they have some of the basic tools in it. Of course, they're trying to hook you in to build your library with one or the other. Both are good. I use Logos. I built my library from it, so not much chance of me switching. If you're going to use the biblical languages and do word studies, you might want to be able to type the language. At the Society of Biblical Literature provides free a Greek font that you can download for your computer so that you can type in Greek and read what others write in Greek. I have this downloaded. I don't use it to type. I use something else I'll show you in a minute, but I have it because others type in this font and it allows me to read it. And also the Hebrew. You can download from Society of Biblical Literature the Hebrew font, as well as the keyboard layout for that. Now, obviously, unless you use it a lot, it's a lot of hunting, pecking, and typing. It's like you've never typed before. If you're not familiar with not only maybe not be familiar with the alphabetical symbols in Greek or Hebrew, you're not familiar with the location of it on your keyboard. And so you basically have to map that out. And it takes a little time, it slows you down, but it's still a good approach. I've not used the Tyndall Unicode font kit. I understand it's very good. You can download for PC or for a Mac, Windows or Mac, but also how to write in Greek, Hebrew, and transliteration on a PC or Mac, and how to change keyboard layout. So it should be another useful tool if you want to look at it. What I have used is if you have Microsoft Word, you can go into wherever in the Word document and click the little back arrow, and you get this menu, and down here at the menu, you have account and feedback and options. Click options, and it will take you to Word options. You can look at various options to how to display your words, general or display or proofing, saving, but there's also one for language. And so when you click that, you can see you can install additional display languages from office.com. These don't cost you any more. You already have Microsoft Office. You're just incorporating other languages. The only problem is it uses a lot of space, RAM, not RAM, but hard drive space. But you see, I've loaded English, Greek, and Hebrew. You can also load spell check for those languages. So I have spell check and Greek and Hebrew downloaded for your Windows settings. Now, obviously, when you're dealing with biblical languages, the spell check doesn't really catch everything appropriately because they're biblically unique words that the spell check doesn't recognize. Okay, so the expository word studies, for those taken for credit, there are only 7 words to choose from, whichever word you choose in the Greek, you must do the corresponding Hebrew word that I've given for you. And the expository is because normally if you're reading a passage and you see a passage that piques your interest and certain words that are used in there or phrases that are used in there, and you're like, I want to know more about this, and you begin from there. We're sort of cheating the system. We're giving you the word to start from and then making you back into it. So doulos, meaning slave in Greek, and its corresponding Hebrew word, eved. We're giving you the word. Now, what you need to do is using concordance. You can find various passages that use doulos or eved, and you're going to find a passage that's of interest to you, and you're going to basically do a word study from that passage. But you look beyond the passage, and we're going to go through how we want to do this. You're going to look beyond it, including for the Greek, you're going to look at the Greek Septuagint. How is doulos used not just by that author? How is it used by other authors in the New Testament? How is it used by authors in the Septuagint? And the reason we want to do that is to give you a broader view. But you're going to emphasize how it's used by the author in the passage, but have recognition of how it's used elsewhere in the New Testament as well as the Septuagint. Okay, I can't answer right now. I'm sorry, Bill. And then the corresponding word. So if you do the Septuagint, the fascinating thing is that now when you do the Hebrew eved, you're going to basically build on what you did, and so now you have a better background of that Septuagint translation that was done of this Hebrew word eved, and that's really what we're trying to get you to do. So doulos, eved, dikaios, meaning righteous or just. And the Hebrew equivalent, sadiq, logos or logos, depending upon your pronunciation of it, meaning, well, it means that we typically find a emphasis for a word, a gloss word, but there's so many other meanings for it. But so you'll have to pick the passage of interest and see how it's used there in that context. Logos and its Hebrew equivalent, devar, diatheke, meaning covenant. And its Hebrew equivalent, barit, and baptizo, here's a verb, baptizo, meaning I immerse, and its Hebrew equivalent, tabal, and the Greek pistuo, there's the verb for I believe, and the Hebrew equivalent, aman, and then of course here's the Greek harmatia, and its Hebrew equivalent, chet, and so you'll want to choose from here and build your word study for that. So first the Greek, and then you'll expand later on and do the Hebrew corresponding word. So hopefully that helps, gives you an idea of what's expected. This is our schedule. We had last night session 1, and of course we'll have 14 sessions. We did spending time on the introduction we're doing now, but generally speaking, every section is going to have this exegetical principles, which we'll go over next. I did record this section last night that's been emailed out, but this intro and exegetical principles I'm now recording so that everyone can have that for their reference. We'll talk about what this encompasses, and the Greek grammar basics. We'll look at the alphabet tonight, and then a practical exercise for exegesis. And then we'll do the same thing each week, building upon, adding to what we've already done in exegetical principles and looking at word fallacies and such, and grammatical fallacies and these kind of things. We're going to look at a little bit more about the grammar. Again, don't get afraid of the grammar. We're not trying to make you grammarians. We're trying to make you familiar with it. What does a Greek noun look like? How does it work in the sentence? What does a Greek adjective look like? How does it work? Prepositions are very significant in Greek. How are they formed? Where do they come from? And adverbs, there's a relationship between adverbs and prepositions. Most prepositions are adverbial. They actually refer back to and modify the verb. And then we'll also look each night at a different exegetical practice. And so we'll do that. We'll have 6 weeks of Greek. Not as much. We'll spend more time in the Hebrew because Hebrew is a little steeper learning curve, and I know that's going to give trepidation, tribulation, trials for everyone, and most people anyway. And so I know, I'll tell you a quick story. I know my Hebrew instructor, Dr. Justin Rogers at Fried-Hardeman University, he learned Hebrew in 2 weeks. He spent more time learning Greek. The thing about Hebrew is we struggle with it because we don't recognize the characters, the symbols, the alphabet, and we're not used to reading from right to left, and so it's a little scary. But once you get past that, the steep learning curve, Hebrew is actually easier to learn once you get past that point. And so we'll spend some time with the grammar basics and looking at nouns and how they're used, and what's called absolute nouns versus construct noun. Hebrew doesn't have a possessive like Greek does, like of God or of Christ or of whatever. And so they use a different form of the noun in order to give that possession perspective, and prepositions and how they're added to words, and look at verbs and how verbs are formed, and the various stem verbs, kal, nifal, pl. Now there's a lot more. We're not going to look at all. We're just doing introduction so that you can have a recognition when someone talks about it's used in the hifal or it's used in the pl or the pual. You can at least have a general understanding of what they might be talking about. So hopefully that will give you an overview. Students taken for credit will be granted 3 excused absences. And so if you're going to be out, let me know. And we'll work it together. All right, so let's move into our meat of the lesson and into the exegetical principles, lesson 1. Look at my notes and see I'm not going to miss anything. In this segment, our study together, we want to examine various principles and practices related to language studies, specifically word studies, but beyond that, we'll examine how words are formed, how they are used to communicate. We'll examine various approaches to word studies. We'll look at various tools and discuss how to use them. And I look for your input on how you've used them, and I hope to learn from you as well. We'll look at how words are abused and phrases are misapplied, and various exegetical fallacies, grammatical fallacies, word fallacies, and more, and such forth. Now, we want to have a little fun in the class. We want to enjoy it. So here's a little video just for fun. Listen to this, listen carefully. This is about a biblical theology. Theology is a study of language, and biblical theology is a study of biblical languages. Now, you might be thinking Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek, but really the study of biblical theology goes beyond that, because all these, the original languages were immediately translated into various languages. And so this sort of pokes fun at all of that, and it's pretty interesting. Listen carefully. Hopefully you enjoy it.
I am the very model of a biblical philologist, a quintessemetician, and a passing Egyptologist. My articles are free from all grammatical iniquity, are Semitic cognate in their order of propinquity. I am very well acquainted too with matters exegetical. I side with all the orthodox and censure the heretical. In print I wrinkle brows of any liberal who wrinkles mine. Got it. And counter all the theses of that vigilante Finkelstein. Counter all the theses of that vigilante Finkelstein. And counter all the theses of that vigilante Finkelstein. And counter all the theses of that vigilante Finkelstein. Man, I can give a lecture on the logic of Leviticus and tell you every symbol in the apparatus criticus, and shorten matters lexical, semantic, and homologous. I am the very model of a biblical philologist. He's shorten matters lexical, semantic, and homologous. He is the very model of a biblical philologist. I know my St. Jerome and all his vulgar prolegomena. I've memorized in order all the known hapax legomena. Then I can tell the age of every patriarch in Genesis, and tell the doggish waters from the Shuraks and the Lenesis. I dream in Aramaic and interpret it in Syriac. I'm positive that Esau was a possible Porphyriac. Then I can posit such a Histophel. Got it! And topple any argument it happens that I wish to topple any argument it happens that I wish to rather topple any argument it happens that I wish to rather topple any argument it happens that I wish to rather. And I can need a sample of Arabian calligraphy and tell you what the scribe was very based on the epigraphy. And shorten matters lexical, semantic, and homologous. I am the very model of a biblical philologist. He shorten matters lexical, semantic, and homologous. He is the very model of a biblical philologist. And I can write a shopping list in classical Sumerian and tell you whether peoples were nomadic or agrarian. I know the Jewish festivals Purimic and Kipurian. I mumble in Mendaic. I can hum a little Orium. And I can sing the alphabet in hieroglyphic Luvian and catalog the animals with pre- and post-Diluvian. And I can tell a surplus from a chasuble or maniple. almost unavoidable, really. And reconstruct the library of ancient Assurbanipal. 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 I wrote my dissertation in a flowery Akkadian and proved the Philistines were almost certainly Canadian. And Chilton matters lexical, semantic, and homologous. I am the very model of a biblical philologist. Chilton matters lexical, semantic, and homologous. He is the very model of a biblical philologist. Presto agitato, s'il vous plaît, maestro. And I can write a shopping list of classical Sumerian and tell you whether peoples were nomadic or agrarian. I know the Jewish festivals were Rimic and Kipurian. I'm humble and Medaic, I can hum a little Orion. Then I can sing the alphabet in hieroglyphic Nubian and catalog the animals from pre-Westluvian. Then I can tell the subs from a Cheshire Maniple and reconstruct the library of ancient Assurbanipal. 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 I wrote my dissertation in a flowery Akkadian and proved the Philistines were almost certainly Canadian. The short matters lexical, semantic, and homologous. I am the very model of a biblical philologist. The short matters lexical, semantic, and homologous. He is the very model of a biblical philologist. How do you like that, Finkelstein?
Well, I hope that was fun for you. And we want to enjoy this. And of course, I hope that this maybe puts you on the path and the road to become the model of a biblical theologist. It would be quite a journey and an enjoyable one, I'm sure. When you think about languages, in Genesis 11:1, we're told that the whole earth used the same language and the same words. Now, same language and same language in Hebrew literally means one lip. And so the same language and same words probably is a poetic emphasis on the unity of language that the people heard and spoke. In verse 7 of Genesis 11, God confused the languages because of the people's pride. They confused their language so they will not understand one another's speech. I have to believe and certainly understand that God knew what he was doing. And ultimately, he knew that there'd have to be various translations of his word, and that there'd be effort involved on our part to understand it. Thus, in verse 9 of Genesis 11, the place was called Babel because the Lord confused the language. It's fascinating to see that Babel in the Hebrew is from the Assyrian word, in Hebrew is Bavel, an Assyrian word that means the gate of God. Catch the connection here. In Ezekiel 12, verse 13, they use Bavel, except as in the feminine form, Bavelah refers to the city of Babylon. Cities are typically in a feminine form. And the parallel here in Genesis 11, verse 7 and 9, it uses the Hebrew word Bala, meaning confused. And so Bala has a sort of a play on words with Bavel, meaning the city of Babylon, the gate of God, pagan gods, and these pagan people, they're confused with Bala. And so that's a interesting Hebrew play on words and usage there in our understanding. Today, our modern Bible is no less confusing. Here's our modern Bible. If I can speak, we'd do a lot better. Is no less confusing. We're challenged to go beyond our English Bibles and look into the Hebrew and Greek. Nathan Soderblom says that, now listen, theology is the eye of the needle through which every theological camel must enter the heaven of theology. And that's recorded in D.A. Carson's page 1. He's saying that language is the eye of the needle which every theological doctrine must pass through. So whatever your theological doctrine, it must pass through philology and the study of language in order to understand or attain whether or not it's associated or is God's intended meaning. D.A. Carson records, or David Allen Black records, that if the student of the New Testament is to become something more than a well-trained technician, he must sooner or later develop a solid perspective on linguistic study and on the nature of language itself. That's what we want to try to do in this class, is have a understand that a well-trained technician or a well-trained monkey are good at doing what they're told, or trained to do. But that's not what a exegetical theologian does. A theologian, a biblical theologist, an exegete must be able to think for himself or herself and not just take what other people say and align it and see if it sounds good to them or not. This is a class, and this class is intended to provide you with some tools, enable you to soundly exegete scripture and come to a conclusion in accordance with God's word. Language does change and it does evolve. And for example, and if you think about and look at 1 Samuel chapter 9, verse 9, it's interesting that they have this parenthetical statement. Now, in this context, Saul's father, Kish, had his donkeys were lost, and Saul was sent out to find them and return them. So he's traveled a long way, and while his travels, he became concerned about his father not knowing his whereabouts. His servant suggested that they go see a prophet, and it turns out that prophet is Samuel. But the author here puts this parenthetical statement in verse 9. Formerly in Israel, when a man went to inquire of God, he used to say, "Come and let us go to the seer, for he who is called a prophet, now was formerly called a seer." Interesting that language had changed, that it was necessary for necessary for the author to put a clarification of what a seer was and what a prophet is now. They're one and the same. So it's interesting to see that the need to add that parenthetical statement. In Judges 12, verse 6, this is, of course, when the Gideonites were battling the Ephraimites, and there the region of Gilead, which was allotted to the tribes of Reuben and Gad and Manasseh back in Numbers 21, and the Ephraimites now are battling for this property in this area, and the Ephraimites would as they wanted to cross the river, they were given told to pronounce a word, and if they couldn't pronounce it correctly, they were killed. So it's fascinating. So in 12, and it says in Judges 12, verse 6, then they would say to him, "Say now Shibboleth." But he said, that is the Ephraimite, Sibboleth. Did you get the difference? Shibboleth versus Sibboleth. For he could not pronounce it correctly. Then they seized him and slew him at the fords of the Jordan. Thus there fell at that time 42,000 of Ephraim. Judges 12 and verse 6. So language evolves in various dialects. It's the same word. Shibboleth and Sibboleth is the exact same word, but it's a different dialect. And so they both mean flowing stream. But the Ephraimites couldn't pronounce it Shibboleth, they pronounced it Sibboleth. And so they were killed. And my point is that we might want to learn to pronounce it in order not to be slain by the Gideonites. That's my point. Interesting. So language are done. There are families of languages. We have in our English here, we'll back down into this, a very large, well-known language. It comes from the roots of the Indo-European languages. And so the European branch of this breaks off into various branches, including the Germanic, which of course is where the Swedish language comes from, and where the German language and Bavarian languages come from, Dutch language comes from, as well as our Anglo-Saxon languages of English comes from. Now, the Romance language from the European includes the Spanish and the Portuguese and the Italian and the French and such and others. But there's also the Greek, the Hellenistic language, and such. And so what's fascinating about this is language, words are loaned from one language. Also, there's the Slavic, Russian, Ukrainian, Polish. Words are loaned from one language to another. We get a lot of our words from the Greek. If you've been to a cardiologist, you know that cardia means heart. And if you have any familiarity with sororities or fraternities, the alphabet there is from the Greek. We have a lot of loan words from Greek as well as from other languages, that because they're in the same tree. The other side of the tree is the Indo-Iranian, which takes us into the Bengali, the Hindi, and other related Persian kind of languages. And there's more. I don't have the tree for the Semitic languages, which would be Akkadian, Hebrew, and Aramaic and such. So I need to find that and put that in here. Yeah. So I want to talk about how we want to apply this in this class. If we think about God's revelatory plan, his revelation to us, to humanity, is both general and specific. General that we see in his creation in nature, but specific and we see in his word. And we see within his word this meta narrative that God's plan of salvation, salvific plan. And across his salvific plan is this picture of redemptive historical movement to bring his people back to him. And so you have this creator creature covenantal relationship that's depicted in a covenantal narrative through his words. And that's, you find both in the Old Covenant and the New Covenant. And in the Old Covenant, we see the Abrahamic covenant, the Mosaic covenant, the Davidic covenant, which are given to us and depicted in the law, the prophets, and the writings. And we see that in the 39 books of the Old Testament, the Protestant 39 books of the Old Testament, the Hebrew is 22 books. In the New Covenant, we have the incarnation of Christ, the Messiah, and coming upon, pouring himself out in Philippians 2 and verse 5 and following, and all the way through the parousia is depicted, the second coming of Christ, and it's depicted in the Gospels and the history as Acts and epistles and of course Revelation, and across the 27 books. And across all these, we see the redemptive keys of God's bringing back his people through the death and burial resurrection that points back to the very beginning and to the very consummation of the marriage supper. And so we see theology and doctrine across all this. And what's significant about this is that, let me pull my notes out, there's something I want to bring out here, that we see in the, God revealed his progressive truth to the fathers within a very specific time period. And so that's a synchronic look, a synchronic study. Synchronic study is to examine a language within a specific period of time during which it was used by people with a shared collective consciousness. A shared collective consciousness is where you have a set of people who have shared beliefs, shared ideals, shared moral attitudes, and those shared beliefs, ideas, and moral attitudes operate in a unifying force within that society, within that group. And so a synchronic study looks at how parts of a language are formed, the morphemes, they combine to form words and phrases, and how proper syntax gives meaning in a sentence. And examines semantics, that is the meaning, what meanings meant in a specific time period to a specific people. So the emphasis is on understanding what did it mean and how was it used by that author and the people he's writing to. How did that shared belief, ideas, and moral attitudes, it had meaning to them. But at the same time, is not only is it God revealed a progressive truth to the fathers within each respective epoch, the Abrahamic period, the Mosaic period, the Davidic period, and in the New Covenant. We find that in Numbers 12, verse 6 through 8, and Hebrews 1 and verse 1 and 2. He showcases those synchronic understandings of his redemptive plan, his salvific plan revealed in the Old Testament 39 books, and diachronically, that is, through God progressively revealed that plan of redemption across the covenantal narrative. So it's revealed across the narratives and across the covenants in a progressive manner. And so we see, for example, the seed of promise to Abram for offspring in Genesis 15, verse 5. It becomes evident in the fulfillment of the church in the New Covenant. Heirs of Abraham, according to the promise in Galatians chapter 3 and verse 9. So there's a progressive revealing, but a synchronic understanding. Abraham had an understanding that's specific in his time frame that progressively began to be revealed of greater nature throughout the periods, epochs, time frames. And so we want to understand both of those. The Abrahamic covenant included unconditional promises to make him a great nation, from which blessings will flow to all the peoples, Genesis 12, verses 1 through 3. This covenant was later ratified by the Mosaic covenant with circumcision, Genesis 17, verses 2 through 14. This Abrahamic promise flows through the conditional Mosaic covenant, it was ratified with circumcision under the Abrahamic covenant, but it flowed through the conditional Mosaic covenant, Exodus 19, verses 5 and 6, intended to set Israel apart, whom the seed of promises in Galatians 3, verse 15 is fulfilled in Christ in Galatians 3, verse 15 through 25. The Davidic covenant also looked forward to the promise of the king and his internal dominion, his rule, 2 Samuel 7, 8 through 13 and verse 16. All of these Old Testament covenants find their fulfillment in the new covenant. And Jeremiah speaks to that in Jeremiah 31, verse 27 through 34. And so we find it in the 39 books and revealed and fulfilled in the 27 books, where Christ is inaugurated in the person of Jesus, John 18, verse 37, in anticipation of the marriage consummation for his return, the parousia, in Revelation 19, verse 7 through 9. So the Creator revealed to the creature his redemptive historical plan and exposed his truths. These truths depict God's relationship with his creation before and after the rebellion of his image bearers and his redemptive plan to return them in a right relationship with him. It is the exegete's responsibility to synchronically, that is through each specific period of usage, or applicable period of usage, to synchronically draw out these truths from God's word while understanding diachronically the revelation from God. And so that's the purpose and the approach of this class, is to help us to see that and draw that out. So let's talk a little bit about the grammatical hierarchy and approach that we're going to use. And we'll finish up here. Typically, we put our emphasis on the word, and we talk about word studies. That's a fallacy. That's a mistake, because the question is the word really the most sacred level, has the most sacred meaning? And the word in of itself, if you go to a dictionary is going to tell you a meaning, but a word in of itself is a symbol that represents a meaning. And until you put it in context, a meaning is not applied. And that's why you have dictionaries that have meaning 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, because in various contexts, it has different meanings to it. And that's why we get a range of meanings for various words. And so the question is the word level the most sacred level? And the answer is no, it's not. There's actually meaning below the word level, and the morpheme level. That is how a word is formed. You have a root word, and you add to the root word, you add a prefix or a suffix or an infix. And those have meaning to them. And that actually helps define how the word is used in its context. And so we want to look at that. Next week, we're going to spend time on morphology and understanding that before we get to the word level. We want to build, and you'll find it fascinating. I know I do, and I'm pretty sure you will too, and how these words are formed and the meaning, that how certain prefixes are in families of meanings and certain suffixes the same. And so just by recognizing the compound or the prefixes and the suffixes, you might have a glimpse of the word's meaning and then find the root of the word. But there is more than just the word or the morpheme. There's the phrases, the clause, the sentence, the paragraph, the chapter, and the books, not just the individual books, but the books of the Old Testament and the books of the New Testament. So we're looking not just synchronically, but we're looking diachronically. And the meta-narrative is significant across all of this. And so as we dive into our studies, our passage studies, our word studies, to exegete, to draw out, we want to be aware of the tools and how words are used, how they're built, and how they're used in phrases and clause, and such as, for example, most prepositions, not all, oftentimes are used adverbially. They modify the verb, and so that makes a difference when you're trying to understand the prepositional phrase and how it's used versus it's being used adjectively. And so I realize this grammar can be a little scary and intimidating, but we're going to break it down very simply so that you can recognize it and build on it. So that's the portion that I did not record last night. I want to get that recorded and out to you. And so we'll do that here momentarily. Let's go ahead and close with a prayer. Our Father in heaven, our God, our Creator, we're thankful for your word. We're thankful for your Son. We're thankful for your revealing of your plan and fulfillment in the new covenant. And we're thankful, Father, for the opportunity to gain more knowledge and to apply that knowledge in our lives, and that others can know you and through your words and through our deeds. Father, we are thankful for those who have the heart and mind to dive deeper, to draw closer into study of your word. And Father, we pray your blessings upon them. We pray that you would guide and give discernment and wisdom. And to all of us, Father, we pray that our focus would be to glorify you, And Father, we pray we use it in a manner that's pleasing with you. We thank you for your Son, for his willingness and obedience to you. And Father, we thank you for your redemptive plan through your Son, that we can have this right relationship and draw closer to you in your word. We pray, Father, we use it appropriately, correctly, and accurately. In Jesus' name we pray all things, and amen. Thank you for your time. And the rest of this is already recorded on a separate, so you'll have two recordings. And next week we're going to focus in on the morphology for the practical exegesis. We'll look at a little bit of the Greek grammar, and then we'll look at how to apply that in a practicum, a practical exegesis, and another word study or passage exegesis. So thank you so much. If you have any questions, just give me a call or email. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to you soon. So find the stop record, and well, it might take me a while to stop record, so we'll see. Okay. Stop sharing and stop recording. There we go. All right, now it's recording. So I have the second half recorded both in Zoom and on vMix. The first half I did not, so I'll have to record that separate and merge them together. But that's okay. Blessed be God. All right, so let's get into what everybody wants to do. Everybody wants to learn the language itself. That's I know that you came for. You're just so excited about doing that. So let's focus on just a few minutes on the Greek grammar. Is Greek hard to learn? Well, some would say yeah, but I would think others would differ. Listen to this guy. Alpha, beta, gamma, delta, epsilon, beta, eta, tera, iota, kappa, lambda, mu, psi, omicron, pi, rho, sigma, tau, epsilon, phi, pi, psi, omega.
Yeah. Can you do it backwards?
Omega, psi, and chi, and phi, epsilon, tau, and sigma, and rho, and pi, and omicron, and psi, and nu, and lambda, and kappa, and iota, and theta, eta, and zeta, and epsilon, and delta, and gamma, and beta, and alpha.
Good job! Yay! Can you read them?
Alpha, beta, gamma, delta, epsilon, theta, eta, theta, iota, kappa, lambda, mu, psi, omicron, pi, rho, sigma, tau, epsilon, phi, psi, and omega. So, if young, I think his name was Aiden, can do it, you can too. It takes a little effort because we're not used to learning something new that's unfamiliar with this. But the good news is that Greek already has a great deal of familiarity that even Greek words you already know. If you've ever been to a heart doctor, you've been to a cardiologist, where the Greek word cardia, meaning heart, comes from. If you've had any association with a sorority, you already know some of the letters. Matter of fact, I forgot to count, I think 65%, 70% of the Greek letters are nearly the same as the English, and almost the same order. And that's because they're from the same family of, and so they have some shared history. And so it's not going to be that difficult to learn. We're going to just go through this very quickly. It's not intended for us to learn it tonight. I'm not asking you to memorize it, but to be familiar with it, spend some time with it, and I'll show you some tools later on so that you can read the language in the tools that we're going to do in this type of. So I'll go through this briefly, and then together we're going to speak together. You guys online as well, though you probably leave your mics closed. But the first one is alpha, and it's pronounced as in father, and beta as in ball, it's a B, we're used to it. So we're used to the A and the B. And then gamma is our G. So we don't have the C here. The alphabet's a little different in that sense. So it's gamma as in gift, delta as in debt, epsilon as in met, zeta as in Zion or Ades. And sometimes it has a DZ sound, you get the Z and D in front of it versus just the Z. Eta as in obey, it's like a long A sound. And then theta is the TH, like in theme. Iota as a pit, or magazine, EE. And so even our I has two different sounds, and here does the Greek as well. Kappa, the K, we're familiar with that. Lambda is the L, no difference for us. It looks different, but it's still an L, it's long. Mu is the M. It starts with an M, mu, although it doesn't look like an M in the Greek, but it's just an M like in man. The nu is the N, as in no. Now here it can be confusing because it looks like our V, but it is the N. So the V is an N and the N is a V. No, the V is an N. So it is a nu, meaning no, or like no, sound like no. Xe, that's the X sound, as in relax. And so it has an X, S into it. Omicron, omelet. Now, I don't say big debate. I would learn as a short O, as an omelet. But there is a lot of significance in scholarly world. And I went to Amherst and my PhD, and they forced me to say it O, as in long O, instead of because there is a lot of, we don't know how they really spoke in that time frame, but you can look at how the writings were done and where changes were made, and you can deduce that they probably had a long O for Omicron, just as they had Omega. Today, the Omega sounds like a short O, and the Omicron also has a short O sound. They're all the same. The P, as in pi, the pi, which are mathematical symbol for pi, for 3.66 something, whatever it is, and sound like a P for pay. The rho, it looks like our P, but it's an R sound. It's a ring. The sigma, there's two different versions of the sigma. This is not unusual. Even our English language will give different versions from time to time. The sigma that looks like a baseball cap, the little circle with the cap at the end of it, that's used in the word, in the middle of the word, the beginning of the word. But if the sigma's at the very end of the word, it changes its appearance, and it looks like our English S almost, a little different, but it's very similar. And so it's a sigma like in sing. The tau is our T, as in tail. Upsilon is the U, as in our tube. So there's no difference there. The phi is our PH sound for phonetics. The key is our XCH sound. Looks like an X, but has a CH like in chemicals. And the C is the PS sound, like in tax. And of course, omega, the long O tone sound. So a lot of these we have some familiarity with. We're just not used to using them. And I want to just take a minute where we read it together. We'll all say very slowly together. Just have a little familiarity. And then you can practice it. I'll show you some tools that will help you. There's so many online tools to help you practice, and we'll figure it out. So let's do it together. The first one is alpha, beta, gamma, delta, epsilon, theta, eta, theta, iota, kappa, lambda, mu, xc, omega, I, rho, sigma, tau, upsilon, phi, chi, c, and omega. You know, the problem with the online people speaking in unison with us is we can't be in unison because you guys have about a few seconds delay. But that's okay. Glad, thank you for doing that. So the purpose is you have some familiarity with it. You can practice it and learn it on your own. If you have no familiarity, if you want to spend some time, I don't know if you have to spend a lot of time. You got to recognize it because the next part of this is to be able to read and put words together. But before we do that, let's talk about these are the consonants. There are, I think, 7 vowels. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, Jackson, is that right? 7 vowels here. And so 7 vowels are the alpha, the epsilon, the eta, the iota, omicron, upsilon, and omega. So obviously, consonants and vowels begin to form words that have meaning and have sounds. But there's also diphthongs, and we have diphthongs in English. Basically, there are 2 vowels that come together, and when certain diphthongs come together in certain ways, even in English, like freight, then those 2 vowels are pronounced as one. AI, for example, is an aisle. You don't say aisle, you say aisle, right? A-I-L-S-E is aisle, like a long I. So that's a diphthong. And so when these 2 vowels, and I want you to notice a little pattern here, the alpha iota, the epsilon iota, the omega iota, and the upsilon iota. So you got A, E, O, U, all ending with I, they're all diphthongs. And so when they're together, they're pronounced as a single vowel. So the alpha iota is aisle. The epsilon iota is A as in 8, so it's like an A sound. The omicron iota is like an oil. The upsilon iota is like an U, a suit, S-U-I-T-E. You don't pronounce the U and the I separately. You pronounce them as one combined vowel, as a suit. Then you have another pattern with the upsilon ending. Notice that when it ends with it, this is how I learned it, and it really helped a lot. Anytime I see 2 vowels together, if it ended in iota, my first thought was going to be, is that a diphthong? And because out of the 7 vowels, 4 of them, the alpha, epsilon, omega, and upsilon, at least more than 50% of those were diphthongs. So I would learn to pronounce it in that way. Now, upsilon, there's 3 diphthongs with the upsilon ending: alpha, upsilon, epsilon, upsilon, and omega upsilon. So you have kraut, feud, and group. The ow, the oo, and the oo sound. So those are diphthongs, and that's important to know in pronunciation. Now, I don't have it in our notes here, but just for if you see in writings 2, I think it's called diaereses, 2 little dots above one of the vowels, you get a diphthong like alpha iota. There's 2 dots above the iota. That's a purposeful there to say it's not a diphthong. You pronounce it independently of that. Other than that, it's pronounced as a diphthong. You also have what's called an iota subscript. The iota is the I, and it's a subscript, meaning it comes underneath the vowel. It's only done with 3 vowels: the alpha, the eta, and the omega. And there are some reasons it does this. We're not going to get into it, but basically it has to do with contraction and changes that occur in spelling. Even when you, who knows how to spell I before E except after C? I mean, it's the same kind of thing. But ultimately, the iota will come as subscript underneath the vowel, that is the alpha, the eta, and the omega. And you don't pronounce the iota then. You just pronounce as if it's not there. It's there for spelling purposes, but you don't pronounce it. And that's because some changes occurred when words form together, and we're going to get into some of that later on when you have cases and declensions and these things. And so that sometimes this occurs because of the contractions that occur. So you have the consonants, you have the vowels along with diphthongs and the iota subscripts. These are all vowels. They you have them in front of you, be familiar with them. But it matters to be able to pronounce it. You can learn pronunciation 2 different ways. You can learn the rules. There are about 6 or 7 rules, and we're going to go through them very quickly. Or you can just sound them out like you do English. I mean, really, when I speak in English and I read English words, I'm basically doing sort of intuitively following these rules where the vowels determine, in most cases, vowels and double consonants determine how I make pronunciation. For example, so you can just do it naturally as you do in English, or you can just learn the rules. For example, if we look at ego, very much like English, we would split it out between the vowel and the consonants and such. So it's go, meaning I. Faux nay, the phi and omega is separate from the nu and the eta, as in faux nay. And then also notice, we'll go back to ego and faux nay. There's some marks that are on here, and I don't know if I included them in my notes or not. They're important. Jackson, make sure I don't miss that. Yeah, I did not include them. So there's some marks on here. If a letter starts with a vowel, I don't care what the vowel is, if it starts with a vowel, it's going to have a breathing mark. It's a comma. It's a backwards comma or a forward comma above the letter, above the vowel. So if a word starts with a vowel, it's going to have a breathing mark, a comma above it. Now the comma is either going to look like a comma or it's going to be a backwards comma. And if it looks like a comma, it's called a rough breathing mark. It's rough because now you're going to add an H sound to it. So we'll do that in a moment. You're going to add an H sound to it. So harmatia. Well, there's no H in the spelling, but it has a rough breathing, so it's H-A, martia. And so you pronounce it with the H sound, harmatia, that means sin. If it has a backwards comma, wait a minute, Jackson, did I have that right? Backwards comma is the rough breathing, forward comma, regular comma is a smooth breathing, right? Yeah. So forward comma is a smooth breathing, and a backward comma is a rough breathing. So harmatia will have a backwards comma, and if it has a regular comma, it's a smooth breathing, has nothing to do with pronunciation, it's just there's a marker. Wouldn't worry about it at all. So really it's only when a backward comma is there above the vowel, it starts at the beginning of a word, the pronunciation changes. That's all that is. You'll see it, we'll go through it. Ego, it has a smooth breathing, like a regular comma, see right there. So I don't put an H sound in front of it. And I start with the go. There's a neat song about ego, but I won't play it. Phone, it has another mark, it's called an accent mark. And basically what it means is where that line is where you're going to accent the syllable. Phone is my accent on the syllable. It's not on the fo, it's on the ne. Phone. Christos, or Christos, however you want to pronounce that. Cosmos, or cosmos, meaning the universe or the world. Anybody know what the next word is? Jesus. Who's Jesus?
Jesus.
Christ. Jesus Christ. That's right. Jesus. I'm going to show you how to divide these up in a minute here.
Is Christos, Christ, Christos?
Yeah, it's Christ. It's like Messiah and Christ. Christ is the Greek Messiah, the Greek translation of Messiah. And so Jesus would be Jesus. No, not Jesus. Jesus would be no, it's Jesus, but I have to go back and look now. I haven't looked at it so long. Jackson probably knows. He'll tell us. Prophetes, 3 syllables. Pro-phe, that's where the accent is. Prophetes. Cardia, you ever been to a heart doctor? You've been to a cardiologist. Cardia. And then you have a compound word, antichristos. Just like in English you have compound words and you pronounce them as 2 independent words, antichristos. And so let's walk through pronunciations very quickly. Here's some of the rules. If there's one vowel or diphthong per syllable, that's the rule. Where the vowels are diphthongs, that's the syllable, and it gets broken up. So here you have ke, ko, amen. Well, that's because I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 vowels. How many syllables are there? 5. As simple as that. Ke, ake ko amen. The emphasis is on the ko, or ka, ake ka amen, or ake ko amen, depending upon your dialect, if you're from the north or the south or the east or the west. And so one vowel per syllable, that's important to know. A single consonant by itself, not as a cluster, such as the e, o, so we got two vowels, e, o, ra, ka, min. So you got the ra as a consonant with the, I keep going back to Hebrew, the alpha, and the kappa with the alpha, and the min are all as separate because it's a consonant with a vowel. And so then you have where you have two. Why is the epsilon omega pronounced as one? It's not a diphthong, is it? So they're pronounced separately. E, o, ra, ka, min. E, o, ra, ka, min. And then if you have two consonants, consecutive vowels that do not form a diphthong, and that's what we just did with the epsilon omega. If you have two consonants that do not form a diphthong, they're divided. E, the, a, sa, metha. So epsilon, the first is independent, just pronounce e. Then you got the next syllable with the vowel, that's the. Then the next syllable with a vowel, it's independent, a. And then you have the next syllable with a vowel, the sigma, alpha, sa, and then metha, asa, metha. And if you have a consonant cluster that cannot be pronounced together, sounds, there are some sounds that just don't like to be connected to other sounds. And so they're separated so they don't have to make them in a consecutive form. M, pro, thin, and prostin. Notice the sigma theta can be said as a single sound, thin. But the MP, the mu pi, is not comfortable speaking together. So you separate them in terms of the syllable, syllabification. M, prostin, and prostin, and prostin. Here's Christos. The ST, the sigma tau, can be said together, stos. So they're not separated. The X, or the key and the rho, the XR, Kri, one syllable, and stos. So Christos. You want to practice it very quickly? Let's do a couple of them. We won't do them all for time. Let's do something simple. All right, let's say this.
Christos.
All right, louder.
Christos.
Christos or Christos. Either way, it doesn't matter. My Greek teacher in Amherst was very fanatical about it. Had to be Christos, but Christos is also taught more predominantly elsewhere. So let's see, let's do this one. Okay, K, go, amen. Amen. K, go, amen. And so you'll need to basically, right now we have divided up, but when you see it together, just remember you're reading it like you would any English word, and you naturally divide a word by the vowels. Syllables are determined by the vowels. If you got 5 syllables, you got 5 vowels. If you got 5 vowels, you got 5 syllables. You got 2 syllables, you got 2 vowels, you got 2 syllables. And okay, so there are tools that you can use depending on how far and what, you know, if you really love the language, you'll find that you can gain a whole lot more and you want to dive deeper. There are tools. If you don't, there's tools online that can help you at least relate and practice. For example, here's one. It's a cute one. I think you might like it. Let's give it a listen. Alpha, Beta, Gamma, the Greek alphabet song. So you can just listen to the song, play it on your iTunes or whatever.
Alpha, beta, gamma, delta, epsilon, zeta, eta, theta, iota, kappa, lambda, mu. Nu, xi, omicron, pi, rho, sigma, tau, upsilon, phi, keep, c, omega.
Very nice. It's catchy.
Thanks.
But to be honest, I could have used a little more cowbell.
I thought it sounded pretty good.
I'm telling you, you need the cowbell louder.
Don't you think it's gonna drown me out?
I gotta have more cowbell.
Okay. Alpha, beta, gamma, delta, epsilon, zeta, eta, theta, iota, kappa, lambda, mu. Nu, xi, omicron, pi, rho, sigma, tau, upsilon, phi, keep, c, omega.
There are lots of tools online, lots of cute, fun things to do. There's flashcards. There's you can get flashcards on your iPhone, on your iPad, or your Android. Sometimes they're free. Sometimes they're 90 cents. You know, when I was learning Greek, I carried flashcards with me all the time to learn vocabulary, but also pronunciation. Nowadays, I have it on my iPhone. I have my Hebrew flashcards on my iPhone. So they're quite available. Just depends how much effort you want to go through. The goal here is not to teach you that you become a scholar in the language, although you may want to go further. The goal here is to give you a familiarity with it so that you can understand and interface with it in various tools. So it'll be up to you how far you want to go with it. And I hope that you'll want to go further as we go. The more we get into it, the more you'll see some more exciting things rather than just the alphabet. Let's get into what I'm really excited about. I think you'll enjoy this. Let's look at the practicum, the practical exegesis for tonight. Let's talk about exegesis first, eisegesis. Here we go. Luke 24, verse 45, then he opened their minds to understand the scriptures. Jesus had miraculously enabled the disciples to understand what was written about him, fulfilling the law, the prophets, and the writings. Wouldn't it be great today if that's all that was needed? You know, but there's no miraculous osmosis in our future or in our present. It requires diligent hard work. All study to draw out God's word requires work. While we all carry with us our own baggage, our own luggage, our own history that sways our perspective of the original intended meaning, we need to put aside ourselves and pull out the will of God. That's what exegete is. It's drawing out the worst thing you can do, and which we all do to a degree. You cannot help but because you carry your own tradition, you carry your own biases, you carry your own history. And when you read, oftentimes you read history into the words. And our goal is to put all that aside and read out the author's intended meaning. And that takes a little bit of work to do that. It's not done haphazardly. Exegesis is the careful, systematic study of Scripture to discover the original intended meaning. That means you have to put yourself aside. You have to be willing to accept what an honest and complete analysis dictates. You know, I grew up in one perspective, theological perspective. I could stay in that theological perspective and read that into the Word, or I can put that theological perspective aside and try to draw out what God is saying, and then I balance that or measure what my theological perspective against that. That's what an exegete does. If we're willing to accept God's Word, even when it goes against our own traditions of my church or traditions of my family, we need to put it aside. When you exegete, I don't care where you came from or what denomination or affiliation your membership or identify with. When we exegete a passage, we want to not take that and put it in, but to put that aside to draw out. And then you contrast that with what your tradition or your understanding is. Paul told us that God is not an author of confusion, 1 Corinthians 14 and verse 33. So if there's confusion, where did it come from? From us, from mankind. Peter wrote in 2 Peter chapter 3 that I think it's around verse 18 or so. It's that speaking of Paul and how difficult his letters are hard to understand, but even The easy things people twist. It's humanity, it's mankind that twists the words of God to suit their own perspective, their own, and sometimes it's done unintentionally. We take what we carry with us and put it into the Word of God, and versus putting what we carry with us and put it in the back and draw out from the Word to determine what goes with us. It cannot be said too emphatically, nor too often, that the purpose of Greek exegesis is not merely to inform, but to persuade and to call forth an appropriate response to God whose word is being proclaimed. This is a quote from David Allen Black using New Testament Greek ministry. Never lose sight of your goal, to draw closer and to persuade others to do the same as you build a relationship with God through his word. In Ezra chapter 7 and verse 10, Ezra writes, for Ezra had set his heart to study the law of the Lord and to practice it and to teach his statutes and ordinances in Israel. Ezra 7:10. The point is to study the word, practice or do the word. That is to live it and to teach the word. A study in of itself is incomplete unless it's lived, unless it's shown to others. An exegete it takes what they pull out and applies it in their lives, regardless of what their own history or tradition says, and applies it appropriately, and so that others can come and see the truth in you. It sounds very simple to study, to do, and to teach, but study is hard work. Doing is application. Teaching is passing it on to others so that they can do the same. When a young lady who's deeply in love with her fiancé receives a letter from him, she reads it very carefully and over. She wants to understand what her fiancé said and meant. It has meaning in her heart. When we get the Word of God, it should have meaning in our heart, and we should read it very carefully with purpose. And so an exegete is going to take the time to do that. I want to recommend a couple of books. One is called, from Gordon Fee and Douglas Stewart, called How to Read the Bible for All It's Worth. It covers everything from translation concerns to different genres of biblical writing and more. Door School of Preaching has a class on hermeneutics. That is the sound study of the Word of the Bible, and looking at different genres and different meanings of different genres. And it's actually a required course for a preaching certificate. I think it's a required course for all certificates. I don't remember. But also a book by Gary Hampton called Hearing God Speak, a Study in Biblical Interpretation. Gary discusses the spiritual importance of comprehension and interpretation in Bible study. And so these are well worth to have in your library. Hermeneutically, 2 Peter writes in chapter 3, verse 16, as also in his letters, we mentioned this earlier, speaking to them things in which some things are hard to understand, which untaught and unstable to distort, they also do the rest of the scriptures to their own destruction. I don't believe it's always done intentionally. I do believe there's some that intentionally distort to their own selfish needs. The Diotrephes seems to have done that in 3rd John. But I believe most people have honest, true hearts and intend to do God's will. But we carry with us our fathers and families' traditions. We carry with us what we've been taught for centuries, years through the centuries. And we easily read that into the Word. And what I'm asking you to do as an exegete, a biblical theologist, is to put your baggage aside. I don't care if you went to Lord's Church in whatever capacity, whatever affiliation that might be, but to put those aside and to try to draw out the meaning and then examine your theological beliefs according to that. And we're going to try to do some of that tonight. Gary Hampton writes in his book these some principles that I think are very good and overarching principles. We're going to look at various principles as we go through in word studies. Recognize Bible as God's Word. It is not just a collection of literature. It is the heart and the mind of God poured out to us so that we can draw closer to Him, to know His will for us and for others, and how to do it. We're to use common sense. You know, we are image bearers of our Creator. Knowing the Bible was written to the common man and not to elites should encourage us to study with the expectation to understand. If there's confusion, it's not on the part of God. It's on our part, and we have to put in the effort to understand why that confusion exists and resolve it. God's image bearers are able to discern what God is saying. We have to have an open mind and willingness to work. I'm reminded in, I forget the passage, 1 Corinthians, Priscilla and Aquila pulled Apollos to give him a more complete understanding of the Scripture, pulled him aside to give him a more complete understanding of the Scripture. He had an open mind to accept something that he did not understand or know. Also in Acts 8, verse 30, the Ethiopian eunuch gained a more complete understanding because he was open to understand. He was honest with himself when Philip asked him, do you understand what you're teaching? How can I unless someone shows me? As he read Isaiah 53. We need to cultivate a sincere desire to know the truth. Not what my parents said, not what one of the pulpits says. We're not going to heaven based on what someone told us. We're going to heaven based on what we are taught, pulled from the Word of God. We need to use good tools. Proper tools ensure a carpenter's work is the best it can be. The same is true with biblical scholars. And we need to pray. All biblical study, Bible study should be accompanied by prayer, asking for wisdom and discernment. James chapter 1 and verse 5. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all liberally and without reproach, and it will be given to him. Notice that it does not say, here's what it says. Let me back up. If you lack wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all liberally without reproach, and it will be given to him. Notice it does not say that it will be given to liberals, but to all liberally. And so those who twist actually turn it into liberalities to their own need. The other thing is context. We're going to look at this in depth as we go through the next few weeks. Context, meanings do not exist, words do not exist, have meanings upon their own. Meanings, words are nothing but symbols put together, and upon their own they have no meaning, or they might carry a meaning in its root, but it cannot be applied until you put it in context. Because context will give it its meaning. And the same word can have different meanings in different contexts, opposite meanings in some cases. Context determines it, and that's what we have to exegete from. Let's look at something here as we go through a word study from 1 Peter 3, verse 21. Now, I came across this when I was doing a class on translation theory, and as you look at various Bibles, and the translations that they have. In 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 21, the NIV 2011, not the 1984, but the 2011 version, says in verse 21, and this water symbolizes baptism that now saves you also. Not the removal of dirt from the body, but a pledge of a clear conscience toward God. It saves you by the resurrection of Jesus Christ. There's a lot of theological meaning behind the word that's used here, eperotema, and I have it circled in the Greek. So the original Greek language is there in front of us. Hokai, umais, anti tupon, nuts. Well, I don't need to read it. That's not appropriate. But eporatema, and we can look it up in the various dictionaries and lexicons. And matter of fact, the suggestion is you look across multiple ones. But here's what I want to. Let's walk through this for a minute. If I'm reading a passage and I says, you know what? That seems to have some very theological significance. I want to go deeper in this. And so I want to know what the word behind pledge is. And it's eporatema. And so I want to start with what's the meaning? Well, I can look at some lexicons and some dictionaries, and I go to what I believe to be one of the best ones out there today, and that's BDAG. And BDAG says eporatema, and it defines its structure. It is a noun in the neuter. And it gives BDAG gives you some secular references and articles that you can research with, and it shows two different meanings. One is the content of asking. In other words, it's a question, and it references some earlier writings from Herodias. I think that's wrong. And I forget the others now. And so those are there if you want to research that. But the second one is a formal request, an appeal. That is an appeal to God in the quotes 1 Peter 3:21. So according to BDAG, this is either in context is referring to a question, asking, an inquiry, or an appeal. But yet, pledge in our English language doesn't mean appeal. It doesn't mean inquiry. Carl?
I'm just trying to make sure I'm on the right page. First, there are 3 columns here. The first column, that's what we find in that passage scripture in.
That's the NIV, the first,
That's NIV, the word.
the New International Version.
So what we're going to be doing, we're going to be looking for a word. So we go through, we pick out that word pledge. We're going to find that word in the Greek language, or eventually maybe the
You're going to look at the behind the English word
Okay.
and see what the Greek word is that they translate it from.
And that's when we go to one of the lexicons to find that.
And how does the lexicon define it? Okay, that's the beginning. That's just we're just touching here. Okay, and ultimately, we're going to find that there's some significant theological significance associated with this, and that's what drew my attention when I first noticed it, for lots of reasons, and I won't get into all of them. But anyway, so the NIV says that this is a pledge of a clear conscience towards God. And so I look behind the word pledge, the English word pledge. I can look at what pledge means in English, but that doesn't really do me a lot of good. I want to know what did they make that translation from? So I go to the Greek word, and you can either use the Greek Bible or you can use the software Tema. And of course, I don't know what that is until I look it up. And I look it up in the lexicon. The lexicon tells me it's a formal request. Well, request and pledge are not the same thing. Not in English, they're not. So that leads me to ask more questions. And so I'll move further, and what I might do is I might consider the context. Number one, what's the broader scope of 1 Peter? Well, the broader scope of 1 Peter is dealing with Christian faithfulness during suffering, to remain faithful, to be steadfast in times of trouble or persecution. And so over and over in Peter, he's bringing this point out. And then there's an immediate context, where that is within the passage itself. That immediacy may determine on the context. So let's read the passage for a moment. I'm reading from the New American Standard Bible. I probably should have put the NIV to be consistent. I apologize, that was not intentional. But in verse 18, for Christ, I want you to notice the context, the immediate context, significant here. For Christ also died for sins once for all. Notice the just for the unjust. Who's the just? Christ. Who's the unjust? All. So Christ died for sins once for all, the just for the unjust. And notice this, so that, here's a purpose clause, so that he might bring us to God. Why did he die? So to bring us to God. That's the purpose clause, all right? Having been put to death, now we know how he died. He's put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the spirit. Verse 19, and listen, you could do a whole study on 19 and 20, but let's not get caught into the weeds and forget what the purpose is here, or what the author's trying to get across. So he was put to death in the flesh, but made alive in spirit. Why is that important? Because he's writing to people who are potentially worried about, because of their faith, of dying. Don't worry about that, because even in death, you're victorious and you rise again as Christ rose again in victory. In verse 20, and so verse 19, so he went and made proclamation to the spirits now in prison. That's a whole different discussion. These people were disobedient, right? And when the patience of God kept waiting the days of Noah during the construction of the ark, in which a few, that is 8 persons, were brought safely through the water. I want you to notice the parallelism here, in that Christ also died for the sins once for all, for the just for the unjust. Who's the unjust? The disobedient. Who's the just? Those that are in the few, that is 8 persons. How are they just? They were brought safely through the water. Right? We miss anything here? Okay. So, then verse 21. Now, this is the New American Standard Bible. Corresponding to that, actually, the New King James is much more accurate in its translation in the Greek. It said there's an antitype. That's what it physically says. There's an antitype. You have types and antitypes. Right? And so there's an antitype that baptism now saves you. Not the removal of dirt from the flesh, but an appeal or a pledge to God for a good conscience through the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And notice that not the removal of dirt from the flesh, but an appeal or a pledge to God for good conscience is a parenthetical statement. It's parentheses off. What it really says is baptism now saves you through the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And then he offers an explanation of that. That is, it's that baptism, that is that watery grave. That we're going to do a parallel here with baptism in water. The removal is not the removal of dirt as if you took a bath. It's not the removal of the outside, but it's a cleansing in terms of asking. The baptism is either one of two things, according to the NIV or some other translations. We're going to look at this in a minute, so give me a moment. It's either, that baptism is either representation of an appeal, your appeal to God for a clear or good conscience. It literally says good, and some translations will say clear, a good conscience. Or it is a pledge to God for a good conscience, for a good conscience. In other words, I'm either going to appeal to God to cleanse my conscience, and that's what baptism is, or I'm being baptized as a pledge to God to cleanse my conscience. One has an emphasis of what I have done, and the other has an emphasis of what God has done for me. That's the difference. They're theologically opposite. It's significant. And so I want to go deeper. I want to understand, why did the NIV say pledge? Is pledge right? Maybe it is. I don't want to carry my own baggage with me. I want to see what they said. All right, so we'll go a little further. Now here's the problem. So I can look in, I'm using Logos or Logos as a software, and one of the tools and advantages I can have is that I can look up as a concordance every use of the word. Now you can do that manually, you can do that online, you can do that with Concordance or Logos or any other software. A concordance is just a list of where it's used, and you get where it's used in the New Testament, where it's used in the Septuagint, where it's used in the church fathers, and see how they used the word and how they understood it and this type of thing. The problem with this word is 1 Peter 3:21. Eperotema is a hapax legomena. Anybody know what a hapax legomena is? Literally, it is means that is only once. I'll find where I lost my place here. Hold on a second. Yeah, literally, it refers to something that's being said only once. Hapax is once, and the legomena is a participle from lego, I say. So it's something's being said only once. It's a word or expression that occurs only in the writing or collection of writings one time. In other words, it only occurs once in the New Testament, or only once in the Old Testament, or only once in all of the Scriptures, or only, sometimes people will say it's only once in Peter, or only, that's not a true hapax legomena. For example, Job and Isaiah have a lot of hapax legomena. Matter of fact, I emailed, and I did not make a copy of it for you guys. I emailed to everybody. Someone had done through Logos 5, an older version, but they said it's updated, of, I forget the number now, of all the hapax legomena words in the New Testament. There are 62 in 1 Peter. Only used once. Now that's a little misleading because some words have a lot of variations, or cognates they call them, and ultimately they have a meaning. It's like a family of words, and they kind of fall in a family of meanings. But some are true hapax legomena. We don't have any history or knowledge of its use elsewhere. This is a case of that. Although Peter does have 62 hapax legomena words. And I gave you a list. It's by it's on the thing I wrote it. But so the ideal thing would be to compare the use throughout Scripture, or to compare how Peter uses the word elsewhere. But the problem is it's only used one time, so it makes it more difficult for us. Not impossible. But what we can do is we could start with English. We don't have to be Greek scholars. We can look at other biblical or Bibles to see how they translate it. The NIV translate pledge of a clear conscience. The New American Standard we've already read, an appeal to God for a good conscience. The New King James, an answer of a good conscience through God. So right now, just on these three, NIV stands alone in contrast to the New American Standard Bible and the New King James. But if we go further, and we look across, I didn't know if I had all that. Okay, let me do that. We go further and look across and I taught translation philosophy stuff, so this is kind of cool to me. You can look at, Bibles have a and a purpose, or publishers of Bibles have a purpose to try to be formal equivalent that is more closer to word for word. That's not physically possible, but they try. That's their goal. And so the New American Standard Bible, the King James Bible, the ESV Bible, the New King James Bible, they lean in that direction, more towards a near literal translation. Sometimes the literal it is, the harder it is to read. And so it's a balance, it's an art in that sense. The NIV tries to go in the middle of the road in contrast to those on the other end, the New Living Translation and the New Century Version. These Bibles are more interpretive. They try to put it in a language that you can understand versus one you can understand versus one you can understand. And so they're more interpretive in their translations, and so they're more idiomatic renderings and more thought-for-thought renderings. The NIV tries to do a middle of the road. It tries to go both ways. It's fascinating, though, when you look at the how this falls out. The NIV uses pledge. The New American Standard is an appeal. The New King James an answer. The King James an answer. The ESV is an appeal. The New Living Translation is a response to God from a clean conscience. The New Century Version is the promise made to God from a good conscience. All of these sort of fit into a pattern, and it's interesting to see the pattern. The ones in green, I didn't use red or blue or red or green because I don't want to bias the perspective here. I want to look at what does it really say. But if you look at the more idiomatic and the more thought-for-thought renderings, the more that they're going to go towards a pledge or promise to God. I promise you, God, I will keep my conscience clear. Okay? They move that direction. Versus the more word for words, look at it, it's just obvious. More word for words move towards an appeal to God for a good conscience. Now, obviously, this is all talking about baptism. Is baptism an appeal to God for a good conscience, or is baptism a promise to God to keep my conscience clear? And so it's interesting to see that pattern. I thought that was unique. You can look at all the translations; they seem to follow that general direction. One of the reasons is that word for word try to go back to the original meaning. The meaning they really try to, where the authors of producers of a idiomatic or dynamic equivalent or thought-for-thought kind of Bible, such as the NIV or the New Living Translation. I got my father a New Living Translation because it was written in a language that he could understand. That's important. He couldn't read he had King James, he put it down, he never read it. Couldn't read it. I couldn't teach him with King James because he couldn't understand. So I got him a New Living Translation. Guess what? He read it. And it worked. He was baptized. So there's a reason these Bibles exist. They're not all wrong. They're just not all right. The problem is the more you go for a thought for thought, you're getting into more interpretation versus translation. There's a difference between translation and interpretation. Now, all Bibles have interpretation, and all Bibles have translation. It's a matter of the mix and how much. So let's go a little further. So what I want to do is I want to look across a bunch of different lexicons and dictionaries and such. And as I look across we won't go through all this for the sake of time. And what I would suggest is you really want to go into each one. This is a summary. And so we see that the vast majority of them focus on a question or appeal. There are a few that focus on a promise. None of them actually say pledge. One does. I'm sorry, the TLNT, the Theological Lexicon of the New Testament. There's a difference between a theological lexicon and a lexicon, a dictionary lexicon. BDAC, for example, is a lexicon. It gives definition. It tries not to, it does in a few places, to give theological opinions. A theological dictionary is just that. It's going to give you its definition as well as a theological perspective. And so you can see the perspective here as you look through it all. I want to point out a couple things. Let's see. I did give you a couple of them here. So the two last ones here. I want to point, the guys online can't see me pointing, but if you notice at the very end, the last two, CLE, G, and T, it's got separating from, it's got hence, a decision, an answer, a judicial sentence, a condemnation, a defense, a speech in defense, a question, or an asking in. And you're like, oh, that's from one word. And so if you're looking at a summary and you use this, you're going to be mistaken. because that's not intended to be, you have to dive into it. I'm going to show you in a minute. The last one, MGLNT, it says a question, an inquiry, or a demand. I said, where did the demand come from? What am I demanding? Well, let's look at it very briefly, just to know. My point is, looking at a summary is insufficient. Now, for our study, that's what we're looking at here. So I pulled up the first one, that is the manual Greek, or the last one actually, the manual Greek lexicon of the New Testament, erotema, and spells it out for you, and gives you sort of a lexical breakdown of its epis from a different word. It's a compound word, so it's a compound word here. And it says that it gives some Septuagint information. It says that it comes from the Septuagint word shehela, and refers to a question or inquiry. But it's also a second definition as a demand. But here's the fascinating thing about that. Notice where it says the source for 1 Peter 3:21 of demand comes from. If it says that it's from the ICC, International Critical Commentary. Their source for their definition is from another commentary. That's a red flag. I wouldn't use that. The second one is that the next one is actually the one above that in our previous list, a critical lexicon in concordance to the English and Greek New Testament. You know, if you're going to use that as a summary and you got all these things about a defense and a separating from, well, it turns out that this is done by semantic domain. So if you don't dive into it, you don't see it. Semantic domain means there are related words that are associated, in this case, an answer. And apokrisis, separating from, hence a decision or an answer. Apokrima, a judicial sentence, a condemnation. Apologia, a defense or speech in defense. And then there's our word number 4, eperotema, a question, an asking, an inquiring after, a seeking, an inquiry. And so it aligns with BDAG and other lexicons as well. But my point is here, you cannot just look at summary, you've got to dive in to understand where they get their source. Is this just a summary? Is this just like in this case, a semantic domain or what? But there's some other things you want to look at. I want to look at how the word's used. Is it used adjectively? Is it used adverbally? And adverbally means it's basically associated with the verb. Adjectively, it's associated with the noun. Generally speaking, there are some exceptions. And from this case, 1 Peter 3:21, it's used adjectively associated with the conscience. And so it's an appeal or pledge for a good conscience. And so it's describing associated the conscience itself. But there are other sources. Normally I'd go to a lexicon or a concordance and look at all of them. In this case, they're just not available. We have the New Testament that we saw one time used, and that's 1 Peter 3:21. But it also exists in the Apostolic Fathers. From the 1st and 2nd century, there's one verse that's used by the Apostolic Fathers. So that's near contemporary. And then you have the New Testament Apocrypha. We know the Apocrypha is the false gospels, the false literature that was never canonized, not used in the Bible, but there's still information you can glean from it in terms of a scholar. And so it's used one time. So let's examine those very quickly. Now, you don't have to be a scholar to do this, but here is the Shepherd of Hermes. That's one of them. That's the church father refers to. That's a late 1st century or early 2nd century document. It was, in fact, almost canonized. It was considered by many to be canonical. And ultimately, it was it was very popular among Christians in the 2nd and 3rd centuries. And you find it in many of the manuscripts, actually included in the manuscripts. You don't have to be a Greek scholar. I didn't try to translate this Greek. I just went online and did it, okay? So you can find the Greek, and there's the actual document, although that's probably not the passage itself. But there's the lale met aton kata ta eporete mata. Now, mata is just the plural form, ta eporete mata, because it literally says he speaks to them according to their inquiries. And he's talking about, and according to the lust of their wickedness, and fill their souls as they themselves desire. And this is, of course, within the doctrine of Shepherd of Hermes. And like I said, you don't have to be a scholar per se. I found a lot of this online and I just verified it. And so Here's a late 1st century, early 2nd century non-canonical church father reference to also being an inquiry and not a pledge. Here is then another, this is called an apocrypha, a false gospel, the Egerton Gospel, and this is an Egyptian document. It's also called the Unknown Gospel. There's another Egerton Gospels. It's totally different. But that's one that's called MS-609. This one, as you can see, the label is up there, the 255. It's 4 fragments. That's either the late 3rd century or the late part of the 9th century, excuse me, 3rd quarter or the end of the 9th century. So it's around 800 some odd, 850, 875, 880 AD. Found in France, created in France, excuse me, found in Egypt. It's 4 fragments found in Egypt. 3 of them are in the British Library, and 1 of them is in the University of Cologne in France. The surviving fragments include 4 stories that are very similar to the Gospels. They're not the same. From John, a controversial story that's similar in John chapter 5 and John chapter 10. There's a similar story about the leper in Matthew 8 and Mark 1 and Luke 5. There's a similar story or controversy about paying tribute to Caesar in Matthew 22 and Mark 12. And then there's this part. It's an incomplete account of a miracle that occurs in the Jordan Bank, perhaps carried out to illustrate the parable about the seed growing miraculously. And so there's no direct equivalent to one of the canonical Gospels, but it may be related to that. But in this passage, the Greek, there's our word, eporatema, and it's talking about, but they were astonished of those who questioned this walk. And Jesus stood by the banks of the Jordan and stretched out his right hand. And there's, of course, there's more around that, which is not pertinent to us. But the point being is, here are some contemporary or near contemporary documents that are non-biblical that also point to it being a question or an inquiry of sorts. Now, that's not the end of our study. We want to go a little further. We're right at the end, guys, so we're right on time here. I want to now, if I were to summarize today between what we've seen by looking at the English Bibles and their usage, and we summarize by looking at, say, the dictionaries and these kind of things, and what if the last thing I've ever done is I'm going to look at the theological summaries. Because I don't want to be biased by what someone else says. I want to draw out for myself and then compare it to them. And then try to understand what they're saying versus what I learned. Did I mislearn it, or are they putting in their own baggage? You'll find both. There's a lot of theological analysis that put their own baggage in by some very good scholars. So we can look at the theological dictionary. You can look at several of them. But here's one that I forgot to say, you also want to look at some, I had it out of order here in my notes. The root and related comparisons. I'm not going to go into these, but you could go look at, this is like a family of words from the same root from eroate. I have to look at erotao. And they all relate to ask, put a question to, search, examine, investigate, unsearchable, find, inquire, make careful, inquire, appeal. And so the family all relate to the same thing. So if you had to put all this together today and stop right now without bringing your own theological bias, the evidence is greater to support that eporatema relates to an appeal or question, an inquiry, versus a pledge or a promise. There's very little. However, there is some evidence. I don't want to discount the evidence. Let's look at it. And then you go to the theological dictionaries, like this one here. Here is the New International Theological Dictionary, New International Dictionary, New Testament Theological and Exegesis. And so I don't have the whole thing here, but I gave you a handout printout of it, okay, the whole thing. Now, I tried to highlight some key things, just 2 or 3 key things. I don't want to bias it too much. I want you to see it for yourself. But I want to point a couple things out. This starts out by, notice it starts out by concepts. It is asking, prayer, seeking, and finding. GL being the general or Greek literature. And so in the general Greek literature, the verb, and they start, by the way, in the box up there, it starts with, and those are the Strong's numbers, G2263 and such. they list all the related words. Eratao, that's the verb. Derota, and then it's to ask about. Eperotao is another verb related. It's to ask a question and request. Here's our word, eperatema, to question, request, or an appeal. And notice you see, that's how they're defining it, at least in the glosses of words they're using. But then they give you some background information. It says the verb, and it talks about the verb already occurs in Homer. Well, we're talking 800 BC. In the form of erotao. So now you're talking diachronically going through how the word changes over time. And with a simple meaning to ask, but always in the sense of questioning someone to get information. And even throughout the class period of the verb is not used with the meaning to ask or favor or make a request. The classical periods is what this means. Even throughout the classical period, the verb is not used with the meaning to ask or favor or make a request. Among various compounds, the most common is eperotao. So in Homer's time, it then moved to classical time in eperatao, and which comes later in the 5th century BC. It must have originally been perceived as somewhat intensive. I'm appealing to you. It's intensive. I'm asking you. And perhaps this feature is reflected in the fact that it's hereditary. I can't pronounce it without looking at it. Hold on a minute. Herodotus. It's some Greek literature around. He's around 400 BC. In his writings, he's a historian. And so anyway, we can read about the general literature. And the answer in the general literature is, it means to ask. It means to request. It means to appeal. And then you get into this last paragraph under the general literature, and it talks about derivatives of the noun, such as erotasis and erotema, which is our word, or near our word. And it says the former means act of questioning, while the latter has a passive sense of what is asked. It is you're asking me, but in fact, erotasis is attested with a meaning to question. It's early back to Socrates, which goes back to like 450 BC. And it gets into compound words. But here, notice the last sentence here. In the papyri, notice the date, 2nd century AD. In the papyri, 2nd century AD, eperotema, that's our word, is used as an agreement, a pledge in a contract. So what has happened is over time, the word began to change in its meaning. And it began to use in secular sense, and it's attested in the 2nd century. Now, when was 1 Peter written? 1st or 2nd century? 1st century. Okay, so that's important. So at a later time, I'm getting there, just going to call. At a later time, eperatema is being used in reference to a pledge. So there is a basis for it to mean pledge. However, the question is that how Peter understood it in a century earlier? That's the question. And the problem gets into, and one of the exegetical fallacies we're going to talk about later is called, I have trouble pronouncing this. Anachronistic. That is, a word has meaning today, and I apply it in the context of someone's usage in yesteryear. That's anachronistic. That's not how they used it then. So, I'm not saying that's the case. I'm saying that this is a 2nd century, this is the evidence they have. The 2nd century papyri for eperatema shows it's being used in agreement as a pledge in a contract. Now, there's some more, and I gave you the handout, I emailed it to everybody. The JL stands for the Jewish literature, and it's going to compare it to the Greek, and it's all dealing with asking and inquiring. I'm going to compare it to the Hebrew, asking and inquiring. And then you get to and it gets to the words, individual words up there. And number 4 down here, it says special attention should be given to the sole use, the sole use of the eperatema in the New Testament. After commenting that Noah and his family were saved in the ark through water, 1 Peter 3:20, Peter adds that this event was anatipos, which is tupos is a pattern. So antipos, a anti-pattern. And so after commenting that Noah and his family were saved through water, Peter adds that this event is anatipos. of baptism that saves and describes the salvation as follows. And there's the Greek, and literally, not a removal of dirt from the flesh, but a request of a good conscience toward God, chapter 3 and 21. If the term is indeed understood in the sense of request, it might indicate the converts seeking after God as contrasted with the pagan's address to oracles baptism as viewed in the prayer to God for a good conscience. In other words, he's comparing it to the pagans' baptisms at that time as they appealed to the pagan gods in their baptism in the similar way that in the Christian baptism. However, to get the whole story, so he goes on and he gives several references that shows how it's used in other documents as an appeal. But then the last paragraph, however, on the basis of some papyrological evidence, see above, and that's why I broke it up and highlighted. What's the papyrological evidence, the papyrus? It's a papyrus from the 2nd century saying that there is some, it's called attested, that there is some witnesses that use this word and associated with a pledge and a contract, a promise to make an agreement. The basis of some papyrological evidence, it has been argued that the epiratema could be used as an equivalent of the Latin. Now we're going to another language, stipulatio, in the sense of formal questions and consent when drawing up a contract. Thus, pledge, and we give some references here, if so, the passage has in view either the obligation that proceeds from a clear conscience or the promise to God that one will maintain a clear conscience. And they give some references for that. Either way, the point becomes clear. Peter is reminding his readers that when they were baptized, a question was asked about their faith in Christ, for which they gave a positive response. They were then baptized in water as a sacrament of that pledge of faithfulness made to God. Peter reminds them of the pledge they made as they faced suffering in Christ. Here's the question. If I look at all the evidence, predominantly the evidence leans towards asking and inquiring. There's some evidence for a pledge, but nowhere in comparison towards the inquiring or asking. And the evidence for pledge is later. Now, if I really want to compare, I can compare the evidence for a pledge, the 2nd century documents, with the 2nd century documents of Shepherd of Hermes, as well as the later ones by the fragment that we looked at, and those show inquiry. So you can't say the word evolved completely because it's still being used as an inquiry, as an appeal. And so my point being is that when you look at it and you look at the evidence, you have to let the evidence carry you forward and make a decision. And I would conclude that the evidence says that this is an appeal to God. It's a request to God. Baptism is an appeal to God. The act of baptism and obedience to baptism is an appeal to God to cleanse my conscience. How does he do that? He does it through the resurrection of Jesus Christ. He paid the price. And that's how my conscience is clear. This is an example that I want to present, at least my perspective on how to move forward. Let's look at what we do. What can we conclude? Well, we've identified significant passages of our word of interest. And so you'll take one of those 7 words and you'll find a passages of interest to you. That's not normally how you do it. Normally you read a passage and you look at some word that's significant to you, and theological significance, and you go behind it. But in this case, we'll start with the word. We'll examine the context and the context around it. We looked at usages. We compared translations. We surveyed the cognates at its various related forms and roots. And we studied the theological opinions. So what can we get out of this? We can conclude that the general usage leading up to the Petrine writing supports ask or appeal. We can conclude that the evidence of later pledges or promises competes with the same later pledges or promises, or competes with ask or inquiring in Hermes and the Egerton Gospel. And so we can't not say definitively that the word epiratema has in fact migrated fully even by the 9th century when the Egerton Gospel was written. You can say that there is some later evidence, nowhere near in comparison to the earlier evidence, but there's some later evidences of that word being used as a pledge. But you can't say that's how Peter used it. The root and the cognate forms all related to it, ask and inquire. The predominance of the Help me out. The predominance of the evidence leads towards ask and inquire. What can we do with it? What else could we do? Well, we really could have gone further. We could have examined Petron's perspective, Peter's perspective on salvation, baptism, on consciousness, and see how that, see if there's any correlation. We could have gone further. We could go further still. We could look at other New Testament authors' perspectives on those same subjects of baptism or salvation or consciousness and these kind of things. And we look for harmony or disharmony. And if there's disharmony, we're the one that's got a problem. We have to evaluate that. We can compare with, and we can compare with the conclusion that we come to, and come to an informed decision. What does God intend here? What does Peter mean? And if I look at it from Peter's perspective and his time frame to his audience, there's greater evidence that he meant as an appeal to God. And most of the Bibles support that. And so I feel very comfortable in landing in that spot. But if they didn't, I'd still be comfortable because the evidence shows that. So, any thoughts or questions before we close? Because I'm already late, I apologize. So, yeah. Eddie?
Yeah, it's sort of interesting for me to ask, why would the NIV move to a understanding that the answer there means pledge, rather than taking the earlier meaning, the synchronic meaning, if not because the translators wanted to make a theological point. Because if they're saying a pledge, it would mean that baptism would not be necessary for salvation. So they would, I think, well, I don't want to judge, but I think that because of a theological bias, they would have gone for pledge rather than answer.
Right. Let me suggest now there's a solution for this, or not a solution, there's a method to this. We can look at, in the NIV, how the NIV looks at other salvific passages. And you'll find that this is the only one that they seem to differ. And that raises another flag. Yes, sir? Carl?
Go ahead.
That's fine.
Look, I'm going to follow along all about the Eddie. It appears to me that, well, when my mind goes to, okay, the first writing, what Peter understood, what he wrote, that was inspired by God. And that's what we want to get the understanding of. But when if it was changed to another perception or a bias is somehow formed, is that uninspired now?
Well, here's the problem that we all have. None of us, have the original, what's called the autographs. None of us have those. They don't exist. And rightfully so, if they did, we'd be worshiping those documents. Instead, we have copies of copies of copies of copies of copies of copies, right? And so in those copies, they're written in one language, and we don't read that language. We don't live that language. We don't understand that language. So what happens to those copies? Immediately, they were translated to other languages for other people to read. Coptic and Georgian and several others. Immediately, there was a vast desire to know the Word of God. And so it's translated. The problem with the translation, it's not the original. The problem with the translation is you can never do an exact translation. I don't care today if you go from Spanish to English or English to Spanish or Greek or French or whatever, you cannot do an exact translation. It's not a possibility. You can come close. You can, in some cases it can be word for word. In some cases it can be what the intent, you look for the intent behind it. But to look for the intent, that requires an interpretation. That requires a digging. And so people spend their lives doing that, and some are quite good. The problem is that they, just as you and I, have baggage. And we're going to look at one later on that's clear baggage. And it's pretty fascinating, by Dr. Daniel Wallace, who I respect greatly. But that's down the road here. But it's very natural to want to put in, it's not intentional like I want to deceive someone. It's just what I know and what I believe. And rather than stepping back from what I know and what I believe and let the Word tell me what it says, and then I inject that into my belief and knowledge, that's the difference. And so the NIV, for example, if you look at its other uses of salvific passages, there's no problem with it. None at all. It's just this one. So that, to me, becomes a red flag in of itself. Why do they did that? I don't know. My point is that I don't want to say they're wrong, and I don't want to say we're wrong. I want to say, let's look at the evidence and who has the greatest preponderance to say is right. And the answer is, it's not a pledge. The preponderance of the evidence is an appeal and an inquiry. And if you look at all the other soliloquy passages, it harmonizes best. What happens when we're baptized? We're buried in watery grave to rise again to walk in newness of life, right? Who brings salvation? Who forgives? It's not you or I. It's God. It's passive. Baptism is a passive. Even though you physically do it, even though there's someone else who physically does it to you, it's God who saves. It's God who cleanses. It's not the person that is in the water. It's not the person that's with you in the water. It's God who does it. It's passive. And that fits an appeal to God. Baptism is my obedience, appeal to Him to cleanse my conscience because I'm repentant and obedient. And that's really harmonizes best with. So you look at all the evidence, and so you want to draw it out first and then align it to your understanding of the Word. And see if it matches. If it doesn't, go back and figure out what you got wrong, because you got something wrong. That's it. Any other thoughts from people online? Okay, I went past and probably went past your bedtime, so I apologize. Try to do better. You know, I had a lot to do, and try to get more discussion next time. And thank you so much. Let's close with a prayer, and we'll pick it back up next week. Next week, we're going to look at more in depth about morphology, and you're going to be really impressed and positive. So I'm excited about it. So let's go to God in prayer. Father in heaven, our God, our Creator, we're thankful for this opportunity. We're thankful for the willing hearts that are here and the minds. Pray your blessings upon each and every single one. Be with us, Father, as we depart. Keep us safe, Father. Pray that we can continue to exegete your word in a manner that's pleasing to you, to know your intended will, to know the author's understanding and intent and the audience that they was reaching out to and the purpose. Father, we pray that your blessings upon us as we depart. In Jesus' name we pray, amen. Thank you, guys.